Rebecca stopped signing the marriage paper, looked the giant cowboy in the eye, and quietly slid a sealed envelope across the table instead. Why would a bride risk losing her only chance at a home before the vows were even spoken? The room inside the dry willow chapel had gone so still that even the wind tapping against the stained glass window seemed too loud. Aaron Whitaker stood waiting beside the minister, his broad shoulders filling the narrow aisle, yet he made no move to rush her. Rebecca Monroe kept one hand on the marriage license and the other on the weathered envelope she had carried across 3 states. Outside, a ranch hand whispered that the winter grazing lease would expire within weeks. Inside, neither bride nor groom looked ready to say, "I do." One choice could cost them both far more than a wedding. Would you have signed first, or asked your hardest question before trusting a stranger? Stay with me and let's find out together. The notice arrived on a windy Tuesday morning, folded twice and sealed with dark blue wax from the Wyoming Territorial Land Office. Aaron Whitaker stood alone outside the barn while the last of the cattle drifted toward the southern pasture. His broad hand unfolded the paper carefully, as though rough fingers might change the words written across it. They did not. Unless Whitaker Ranch had a lawful co-owner before the first winter snow, its seasonal grazing lease would be reviewed. Any delay in renewal could open the land to competing claims. Aaron read the notice twice. Then he folded it exactly as it had been. Across the yard, Edith Whitaker watched him from the porch with a coffee cup warming both hands. She had raised Aaron after his parents were gone. She knew the difference between the silence that meant peace and the silence that meant trouble. "This isn't about the cattle," she said quietly after he stepped onto the porch. Aaron handed her the notice. "It never is." She finished reading and rested the paper on her lap. "Calvin Dorsey has been buying debts all summer." Aaron nodded once. "He already owns the Carter place. And the Millers. And half the notes at Peterson Creek." Edith looked toward the hills where the morning sun had barely reached the tops of the pines. "If he controls the water, he controls the valley." Neither spoke for a while. The only sounds came from the windmill creaking above the well and horses shifting inside the stable. Finally, Edith set down her cup. "I know someone." Aaron looked at her. "A respectable woman? A respectable person?" He almost smiled. "That's not what I asked." "No," Edith answered. "It isn't." 3 days later, the stagecoach rolled into Dry Willow, wrapped in a cloud of pale autumn dust. People gathered without pretending they had other business. The general store emptied. 2 boys stopped throwing horseshoes beside the blacksmith shop. Even Reverend Collins stood outside the chapel longer than usual. Word had traveled quickly. Aaron Whitaker was taking a wife. Most expected a wealthy widow from Cheyenne, or perhaps the daughter of a ranch owner from farther east. Instead, the coach door opened, and a woman stepped into the afternoon sunlight carrying a weathered leather trunk no larger than a sewing chest. Rebecca Monroe paused only long enough to steady herself. She wore a plain brown traveling coat over a faded blue dress. Dust covered the hem from several days on rough roads. Her gloves had been mended more than once, but carefully enough that the stitching almost disappeared. She looked around without rushing. Not searching, simply observing. Aaron waited several yards away beside his wagon. He removed his hat. No speech, no introduction, only a quiet nod. When he approached, he offered his hand. Rebecca glanced at it, then met his eyes. "I can manage." Her voice was calm. Aaron withdrew his hand without offense. The driver released the brake. At that exact moment, one wheel slipped deeper into a rut left by yesterday's freight wagon. The coach leaned. Rebecca's boot slid on loose gravel. Before she reached the ground completely, Aaron caught her by the forearm. Not her waist, not her shoulder, only enough to steady her. The instant both of her feet found solid earth, he let go. "So," the driver muttered with a grin, Guess everybody needs a little help now and then. Rebecca dusted her sleeve. Sometimes. Nothing more. Edith watched the exchange from across the street and quietly smiled to herself. Neither one had tried to impress the other. That was probably a better beginning than most marriages she had witnessed. The ceremony took place the following morning inside the small white chapel overlooking Dry Willow. Only 8 people attended. Reverend Collins, Edith, 2 neighboring ranchers, the stagecoach driver who happened to remain in town, 3 curious townsfolk who claimed they merely wanted a place to sit out the morning wind. The vows were brief. Neither Aaron nor Rebecca tried to decorate simple words. I do. I do. The marriage register was signed with steady hands. When the Reverend stepped aside, Aaron hesitated for barely a heartbeat before placing the lightest kiss against Rebecca's forehead instead of her lips. It was respectful, measured, nothing about possession. Outside, whispers floated across the wooden sidewalk before the couple had even climbed into the wagon. They barely know each other. It looks more like business. Maybe that's exactly what it is. Aaron climbed onto the driver's seat. Rebecca settled beside him. Neither turned to answer. Whitaker Ranch stood nearly 5 miles outside town, where the valley widened beneath long stretches of golden grass. The house was larger than Rebecca expected. Not grand, simply built to last. The porch boards carried years of boot marks. Iron horseshoes framed the stable entrance. A pair of saddle blankets dried across the fence. Everything showed use. Nothing showed waste. Edith led Rebecca upstairs. The east room is yours. Inside waited a narrow bed, a walnut dresser, a small writing table beside the window, and a quilt stitched from worn work shirts. No flowers, no decorations, only clean sheets smelling faintly of cedar. Later that afternoon, Aaron spread several papers across the dining table. This should be settled now. Rebecca sat opposite him. He slid a handwritten agreement across the table. She read every line. Separate rooms, separate property, payment for bookkeeping or ranch work if requested, freedom to leave after 1 year if both agreed. Aaron would never open her locked trunk. Rebecca would never enter his office without permission. She looked up. You wrote this yourself? Aaron nodded. I asked the Reverend to make sure it was lawful. Rebecca reached for the ink bottle. I'd like one change. Aaron waited. If I work beyond bookkeeping, I receive the same wages as anyone doing the same job. Aaron considered that for only a moment. Fair. He crossed out one sentence, wrote another, then handed her the pen. Their names rested beside one another at the bottom of the page. No speeches followed, only the scratch of ink drying. The first few days settled into an unusual rhythm. Aaron left before sunrise every morning. Rebecca often heard the back door close while darkness still covered the valley. She expected shouting from the corrals. Instead, she heard something different. Aaron speaking softly to a nervous colt, whose leg had been wrapped after stepping into a badger hole. Easy now. That's enough. You're all right. The enormous man who made strangers step aside barely raised his voice above a whisper around frightened animals. Later that week, Rebecca watched him repair a leaking roof for one of the ranch hands whose young son had fallen ill. He refused payment. Before sunset, he quietly returned home carrying nothing but his hammer. Inside the house, he always stepped aside first whenever Rebecca entered a narrow hallway. His shoulders nearly filled the passage. Still, he waited against the wall until she passed, never once brushing against her, never assuming the space belonged to him simply because he was larger. She noticed. She said nothing. One evening, Edith asked if Rebecca might help dust the old records room before winter. The room had not been properly cleaned since Aaron's father died. Shelves filled with ledgers leaned beneath years of dust. Bundles of freight receipts rested beneath faded canvas covers. Rebecca worked slowly. She lifted an old oak writing table away from the wall. As she brushed dirt from its underside, her hand stopped. There, cut carefully into the wood. Not a random scratch. A small mark shaped like two joined triangles. Her breathing caught. She reached into her coat pocket and unfolded a worn piece of paper she had carried since leaving Kansas. The corner of one freight receipt held the exact same symbol. Her father's mark. The one he used only on shipments he believed required special attention. Rebecca stared at the carving for several long seconds. According to every official record she had ever read, her father had never come anywhere near Redstone Valley. Yet someone had carved his private mark beneath Aaron Whitaker's desk. Outside, the wind pushed against the window panes. Somewhere below, Aaron closed the front gate before nightfall. Rebecca folded the paper with careful fingers. For the first time since arriving, she realized she might not have traveled to Wyoming only to begin a marriage. She might have arrived where her father's last unanswered journey had truly begun. Rebecca folded the worn receipt and slipped it back into her coat pocket. She ran her fingers over the carved mark one last time before sliding the old writing table into place. Downstairs, she heard the front door open. Aaron's boots crossed the hallway with the slow, steady rhythm she had already begun to recognize, heavy enough to announce his presence, never hurried enough to make anyone uneasy. "Edith?" he called. "In the kitchen." Rebecca waited until his footsteps faded before leaving the records room. She said nothing about the carving. Not yet. The next morning arrived cold enough for frost to cling to the fence rails. A kettle hissed on the stove while Edith buttered thick slices of yesterday's bread. Aaron was already wearing his work coat. "There'll be a supply wagon from Lander this afternoon," Edith said. "Amos wants the storage books checked before it gets here." Aaron looked toward Rebecca. "If you're willing." She nodded. "I am." He simply answered, "Thank you." No grand appreciation, just words that sounded honest. After breakfast, Amos Pritchard unlocked the storage barn with a brass key hanging from his belt. He was a broad man, with gray beginning to settle into his beard. Years of ranch work had bent his shoulders slightly, though his voice remained confident. "The books are over there," he said, pointing toward a narrow desk beside stacked grain sacks. "Take all the time you need." Rebecca removed her gloves and opened the first ledger. The pages smelled faintly of lamp oil and dust. She worked quietly. Corn, salt blocks, harness leather, nails, fence wire. Everything appeared ordinary, until it didn't. She paused over a shipment of pine lumber delivered 6 months earlier. 48 boards, marked for irrigation repairs. She glanced around the barn. No fresh lumber. She turned another page. Iron pipe fittings, paid in full. No record of installation. Then another. Heavy rope, pulley wheels, timber braces. Enough material to rebuild nearly half the water system. Yet outside, every trough and wooden flume looked years older. Rebecca copied several figures onto a blank sheet of paper. Amos noticed. "Problem?" She looked up. "Just checking totals." He smiled politely. "Numbers can make a person dizzy." She returned the smile. "Only when they don't agree." For the first time that morning, Amos's expression paused before settling back into place. When the freight wagon arrived that afternoon, Rebecca helped compare invoices against delivered goods. 30 bags of feed, present. 20 coils of wire, present. 5 barrels of lamp oil, present. Everything unloaded exactly as listed. Everything except the older purchases buried deeper inside the books. Late that evening, she unfolded the copied figures again. One column bothered her more than the rest. Waterway lumber. She closed the ledger. If the wood had been bought, it had been used somewhere. Before dawn the following morning, Rebecca borrowed one of the quieter mares from the stable. She tightened the saddle herself. The horse turned its head once toward her, then stood patiently. A ranch hand looked up from filling buckets. "Going somewhere?" "Just following the creek." He shrugged. "Won't find much but rocks." She smiled. "Sometimes that's enough." The western stream curved through tall grass before disappearing toward a line of cottonwoods. Rebecca rode slowly. The morning air carried the smell of damp earth mixed with sage. She dismounted several times, kneeling, touching the soil, watching how water moved around smooth stones. Near midday, she noticed something odd. Fresh wagon tracks, not on the road, across open grass where no freight should travel. The wheels had crushed young weeds only a day or two earlier. She followed them another 100 yards, then stopped. The stream had narrowed, far more than it should have this early in autumn. She crouched beside the bank. Mud still clung to the roots. Someone had disturbed the earth recently. Nearby, beneath loose stones and dry weeds, the corner of an old wooden gate protruded from the ground. Not a fence gate, a water gate. Rebecca brushed away more dirt. A heavy timber valve, hidden, unused, or meant to appear that way. She reached toward it. A sharp crack echoed behind her. The ground shifted beneath one boot. Part of the creek bank gave way, sliding several feet into the shallow channel below. Her mare jerked backward. Before the horse could panic, another hand caught the bridle. Aaron. He steadied the mare first. Only after the horse stopped trembling did he step back. "You came a long way." Rebecca brushed dirt from her sleeve. "So did you." "I saw the saddle missing." "You followed me?" "I followed the horse." He looked toward the broken bank. "It wasn't safe." Rebecca frowned. "I wasn't asking anyone to rescue me." Aaron rested one hand on the saddle horn. "I know." Silence settled between them. Wind stirred the dry grass. A hawk circled high above the valley. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "I think someone's diverting water." Aaron looked toward the creek. "There hasn't been enough rain." "This isn't about rain." She pointed toward the buried timber. "That's a control gate." Aaron walked over and examined it without touching. "It hasn't been used in years." Rebecca shook her head. "The dirt on those hinges is fresh." He remained quiet. She continued. "The supply records show lumber and pipe repairs that don't exist here." Aaron folded his arms. "Amos has managed these books since my father died. I'm not accusing him. You're questioning his records. I'm questioning what the records don't explain." He let out a slow breath. "I've known Amos half my life." Rebecca met his eyes. "I've known numbers my whole life." Neither looked away. Then Aaron glanced once more at the damaged creek bank. "I still don't think anyone's stealing water," Rebecca answered softly. "I hope you're right." They rode home without speaking much. Late that afternoon, shouting drifted across the southern pasture. Several ranch hands waved their hats. Aaron urged his horse forward. Rebecca followed. Nearly 30 head of cattle crowded around a dry watering trough. Dust coated their noses. The wooden basin held only cracked mud. Aaron stepped down immediately. He ran one hand inside the trough. Dry. Completely dry. Amos arrived moments later, breathing hard. Must have clogged upstream. Aaron looked toward the western hills. Rebecca said nothing. She simply watched the empty trough. That evening, Aaron knocked once on the open doorway of the east room. Rebecca looked up from her notes. He held 3 worn ledgers beneath one arm. "You wanted the records." She stood. "I did. You'll have 3 days." He placed the books on her writing table. And after that, we decide what comes next. The following 2 days passed with little sleep. Aaron accompanied Rebecca across different sections of the ranch. Not because he doubted her, not because he trusted her completely, simply because the land stretched for miles, and autumn daylight disappeared early behind the mountains. Together they measured slopes using twine and wooden stakes. They dug beneath loose rock near the western ridge. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Rebecca struck something solid with the end of a shovel. Wood. Aaron knelt beside her. Together they cleared away packed dirt. A narrow flume appeared beneath the earth. Old, hidden, still carrying a thin stream of moving water. Rebecca followed its direction with her eyes. It disappeared beneath a stand of juniper trees. Toward the property Calvin Dorsey had quietly purchased during the summer, Aaron stared at the concealed channel. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, he asked, "What do we do?" Rebecca replaced the loose boards exactly as they had found them. "We leave it." He looked surprised. "You want whoever's using it to think no one knows." She nodded. "If someone opens the gate every night, we wait. And watch." Aaron studied her face, then gave one slow nod. That night they hid among cedar trees overlooking the concealed water gate. The moon rose late. Crickets filled the silence. Hours passed, just when Rebecca wondered if no one would come. A lone rider emerged from the darkness. He wore the long canvas coat issued to Whitaker Ranch hands. The horse stopped beside the buried valve. The rider climbed down, bent over the hidden gate, and lifted something beneath the weeds. As moonlight slipped through the clouds, the man's coat shifted. Rebecca caught a brief flash of silver. A belt buckle, oval, deeply engraved, exactly like the one resting against her father's waist in the last photograph ever taken of him. Her breath caught. She reached gently for Aaron's sleeve. Without speaking, she pointed toward the silver buckle disappearing into the night. Aaron narrowed his eyes, but the rider had already mounted again. The horse slipped quietly between the cottonwoods and vanished beyond the ridge. Neither of them moved. The only sound was the soft rush of water beneath the hidden flume. Aaron finally whispered, "Did you recognize him?" Rebecca kept watching the darkness. Not the man. She looked down at the tracks left between the buried gate. "The buckle." Aaron turned toward her. "It belonged to my father." The words settled heavily between them. He did not ask another question until they reached the ranch. Inside the house, Edith had left a lantern burning on the dining table along with a pot of coffee wrapped in a towel shawl to keep it warm. Aaron poured 2 cups. Rebecca accepted hers but barely touched it. "I think it's time," she said quietly. "For what?" "For you to know why I came." She climbed the stairs and returned carrying the small leather trunk that had remained locked since the day she arrived. Aaron looked at it but made no move toward the brass latch. "You told me never to open it." "I know." Rebecca unlocked it herself. Inside lay several carefully folded letters tied with faded blue ribbon. A sepia photograph, a leather notebook missing several pages, and a freight receipt bearing the same carved symbol she had found beneath the old desk. She handed Aaron the photograph first. A younger man stood beside a loaded freight wagon. Around his waist rested the silver buckle. "My father," Rebecca said. "He worked for Prairie Freight Company outside Wichita." Aaron studied the picture. "He came here?" "He was trying to." Rebecca unfolded one of the letters. The company had been losing shipments for nearly a year. Lumber, pipe fittings, hardware meant for ranches farther west. She paused. He believed someone was changing delivery records. Aaron listened without interrupting. He wrote that one ranch name appeared more than once. Rebecca slid the final letter across the table. Whitaker Ranch. Aaron read the single line twice. Then again. He never arrived, Rebecca continued. We were told his wagon overturned during a storm north of Cheyenne. She looked at Aaron. But the paperwork never matched. Silence filled the room. Aaron rested both hands on the edge of the table. You accepted Edith's letter because of this ranch. Yes. You married me because you thought the answer might be here. Rebecca lowered her eyes for the first time since he'd known her. At first. The words hurt more than either of them expected. Aaron stood, not abruptly, not angrily. He carried the photograph to the window where moonlight touched the glass. So every question started before I met you. He nodded once. And after? Rebecca answered honestly. After. I wasn't sure anymore. Aaron remained facing the window. His shoulders looked heavier than usual. I kept wondering why someone who barely knew me trusted me enough to sign a marriage contract. Rebecca closed the trunk. I didn't. Another quiet truth. I trusted Edith. Aaron drew a slow breath. I see. He returned the photograph without another word and climbed the stairs. Rebecca listened until his bedroom door closed. Neither of them slept much that night. The following morning felt colder than the one before. Breakfast passed with ordinary conversation between Edith and the ranch hands, but Aaron and Rebecca spoke only when necessary. More coffee? No, thank you. Biscuits? I'm fine. The silence was polite, which somehow made it harder. By late afternoon, Rebecca saddled the same mare she had ridden earlier in the week. She waited until most of the ranch hands were repairing fencing along the northern pasture, then quietly rode toward Granite Cut. She told herself she only wanted another look at the buckle, nothing more. Granite Cut narrowed into a rocky passage where wind carried the smell of pine sap and damp stone. Fresh hoofprints crossed the trail. Rebecca followed them. Around the next bend, she heard a familiar voice. Amos Pritchard. He stood beside an abandoned supply shed with his hat in one hand. I wondered how long it'd take. Rebecca stopped several yards away. You knew I'd come. You've been asking the right questions. She stayed in the saddle. My father came here. Amos rubbed a tired hand across his face. He did. The answer came so quickly that Rebecca almost missed it. He found the lumber. And the water? Amos nodded slowly. He found that too. Rebecca felt the air leave her lungs. Then what happened? Amos looked toward the canyon wall instead of at her. I owed money. To Calvin Dorsey? More than I could ever repay. He swallowed hard. Dorsey said nobody would get hurt. Rebecca's voice barely rose above the wind. My father disappeared. I only meant to send him away. Amos closed his eyes for a brief moment. He wouldn't stop asking questions. He found the hidden flume. And he found the books. Rebecca tightened her grip on the reins. So you chased him. I told him to leave. You threatened him. I tried to scare him. Before Rebecca could answer, another sound echoed through the canyon. Hoofbeats. Fast. Amos turned. Aaron rode into Granite Cut, his horse covered with sweat. Rebecca's mare had returned to the ranch alone after slipping its reins against a low branch. Aaron had followed the trail without stopping once. His eyes moved from Rebecca to Amos, to the folded ledger page clutched tightly in Amos's hand. So this is where you brought it. Amos stepped backward. It's not what you think. Aaron dismounted. He did not reach for the rifle in his saddle. He simply walked forward. His size alone forced Amos another step back. I've worked this ranch 18 years, Amos said. I know. I never wanted the truth. Aaron finished the sentence quietly. That's what you didn't want. Amos suddenly shoved the folded paper behind his back. Aaron caught his wrist before the page could disappear into the brush. The movement was quick, controlled, firm enough to stop him, nothing more. The paper drifted harmlessly onto the dirt. Amos struggled once. Aaron released enough pressure for him to stop fighting. "I could have trusted you," Aaron said. His voice remained low. "I did trust you." Amos's shoulders collapsed. "I know." Aaron bent, picked up the page, then stepped aside. "I'm not settling this here." He looked Amos directly in the eyes. "You'll answer before Judge Hollis." "Not before me. Not before this ranch. Before the law." The ride home passed beneath the sky turning orange behind the Wind River peaks. Rebecca sat quietly beside Aaron once they reached the house. A shallow scrape along her palm had begun bleeding, where rough stone had caught her while climbing through the canyon. Aaron noticed it only after she reached for the coffee pot. "Wait." She looked up. Without another word, he disappeared into the pantry and returned with a small tin box Edith kept for cuts and splinters. He poured clean water into a basin. "May I?" Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Aaron washed the dirt away carefully. His hands were enormous, yet the cloth barely pressed against the scrape. "I'm sorry," Rebecca whispered. He kept wrapping the bandage. "For what?" "For believing I had to find everything alone." Aaron tied the knot neatly. "I should have given you a reason not to." Their eyes met only briefly. Neither smiled. Neither needed to. At dawn the next morning, one of the ranch hands came running across the yard. "Aaron!" He looked up from repairing a gate hinge. "The storage room." Aaron and Rebecca reached the barn together. The padlock still hung in place, but inside. The chair stood empty. A rope lay neatly cut across the floor. The rear window had been forced open just enough for a man to climb through. Pinned beneath a horseshoe nail on the wall was a single folded scrap of paper. Aaron removed it slowly. He read the message once, then handed it silently to Rebecca. The words were short. "Keep digging. And next time, we take the woman instead." Aaron folded the note once, then again. The paper disappeared inside his coat pocket, but the threat remained in the room. Rebecca stood beside the broken window, looking at the sill. There was mud along the lower edge, not the pale dust from Whitaker Ranch. Red clay, thick and dark. Aaron saw it too. "North Road," he said. Rebecca nodded. "The Forge Road." By mid-morning, they were riding toward Dry Willow. The wind had turned colder during the night. Pine needles moved across the wagon ruts in thin, restless lines. Aaron rode half a length ahead, not blocking her path, but close enough to turn if another rider appeared behind them. Rebecca noticed. She did not ask him to move. Malcolm Vance's forge stood near the edge of town, where the road bent toward the iron hills. The ring of hammer against metal stopped as soon as they entered the yard. Malcolm set his tongs down. His eyes went first to Aaron, then to Rebecca. "You found the mud," he said. Aaron dismounted slowly. "Where's Amos?" Malcolm wiped both hands on his apron. "Alive." Rebecca stepped forward. "You took him from the storage room." "I did." "Why leave the threat?" "I didn't." Malcolm's answer came without hesitation. Aaron studied him. The forge behind Malcolm glowed orange in the dim morning light. A horseshoe rested unfinished on the anvil. Beside it lay a short length of rope, cut cleanly with a blacksmith's knife. Rebecca's gaze settled there. Malcolm followed it. "I cut him loose," he admitted. "But I didn't threaten you." "Then who did?" Aaron asked. "Someone who knew I was coming." Malcolm glanced toward the road before lowering his voice. "Dorsey's men have been watching Amos for weeks. If he reached Judge Hollis, Calvin would lose more than land." Rebecca's jaw tightened. Where is he? Malcolm removed his apron. Come with me. They followed him beyond town, past an abandoned lime kiln, and into the lower pine country. The trail narrowed until wagons could no longer pass. After nearly an hour, Malcolm stopped beside a weathered cabin hidden between rock and timber. The roof sagged on one side. One shutter hung loose. No smoke rose from the chimney. Amos sat inside near a cold stove, his wrists bound in front of him. He looked exhausted. Aaron entered first. Amos flinched at the sight of him. Aaron did not raise his voice. You could have asked for protection. Amos looked down. I didn't know who to trust. Rebecca stepped through the doorway. You trusted Dorsey? For too long. Malcolm moved to a loose floorboard beside the hearth and pried it up with a chisel. Beneath it sat an oilcloth bundle. He placed it on the table. Rebecca's fingers went still. Her father's name was written across the cloth. Samuel Monroe. She looked at Malcolm. You knew. I knew enough to be afraid. He unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a freight ledger, a hand-drawn map, and 3 folded pages browned along the edges. Rebecca opened the first page. The handwriting was her father's. She knew the slope of every letter. For several seconds, she could not read. Aaron stood beside her without touching her. Close. Present. She drew one breath and began. Samuel had followed missing shipments from Kansas into Redstone Valley. He discovered that lumber, pipe fittings, and iron gates had been purchased under Whitaker Ranch accounts, then diverted to a hidden channel across public land. The channel fed property Calvin Dorsey planned to buy through foreclosures. The second page described Amos, not as the architect, as the man who opened gates, altered receipts, and warned Samuel to leave. The final page ended abruptly. If anything happens to me, Dorsey owns the plan. Amos only carries it. Rebecca lowered the paper. What happened after he wrote this? Malcolm looked toward the window. His wagon was cut loose above Granite Cut. Aaron's face hardened. You saw it? I found him afterward. Rebecca gripped the edge of the table. He was alive? For 2 days. The room seemed to narrow. Malcolm continued carefully. He made me promise to hide the records until someone could use them without being buried beside them. Rebecca turned away. Outside, wind pressed against the loose shutter. A single nail squealed with each movement. Aaron looked at Malcolm. You should have brought this to my father. Your father was already sick. Dorsey owned half the notes in town. Judge Hollis wouldn't return until spring. Malcolm's voice roughened. And I had a wife and 2 girls. No one answered. Fear did not excuse silence, but Rebecca understood what silence could cost. Amos finally spoke. Dorsey will deny the handwriting. Rebecca looked at him. He'll say the ledger was planted. He'll say Samuel was stealing freight. Then you testify, Aaron said. Amos gave a bitter laugh. And disappear before court? Aaron stepped closer. No. One word. Nothing loud in it. Still, Amos believed him. Rebecca spread the map across the table. Testimony won't be enough. Aaron looked down at the marked water route. What are you thinking? We make Dorsey prove he knows the system. Malcolm shook his head. He won't talk to you. Not to Aaron. Rebecca placed one finger on the old measuring station at Granite Cut. To me. Aaron's gaze lifted. No. He thinks I came here for my father's name. You did. He'll believe I care more about clearing that name than keeping this ranch. You'd have to meet him alone. Almost alone. Aaron's jaw tightened. Rebecca slid the map between them. Don't stand in front of me. His eyes met hers. Rebecca, stand where I can see you. The words held. Not a plea, not a challenge, A place offered beside her. Aaron looked at the map for a long while. Then he rested one broad hand near hers, not over it, beside it. When? 2 days. They returned to Whitaker Ranch before sunset. The next morning, Aaron called every ranch hand into the main yard. Cold wind snapped the canvas covers over the supply wagons. Men stood in a rough half-circle, hats low, hands buried in coat pockets. Rebecca waited on the porch. Aaron held a ring of brass keys. Mrs. Whitaker will sign all water orders from this day forward. Murmurs passed through the yard. One man stepped forward. Amos always handled that. Amos is no longer foreman. Another ranch hand glanced toward Rebecca. You mean she gives the orders now? Aaron's answer came plain. On water and accounts, yes. A younger hand dropped his gloves into the dirt. I didn't hire on to answer to somebody who hasn't been here a month. Aaron did not morpho towards him. He did not threaten. The north gate is open. 3 men left before noon. Aaron watched them ride away. His face showed nothing. Rebecca stood beside him at the fence. You lost good workers. I lost men who would have questioned you when there wasn't time for questions. He handed her the keys. The weight settled into her palm. Their fingers touched briefly. Neither withdrew too fast. News reached Calvin Dorsey by evening. Rebecca sent her message the next morning. She offered copies of Samuel's papers in exchange for money, safe passage east, and a written release from the marriage contract. Dorsey's reply arrived before dark. Granite cut. The old measuring station. Noon. 2 days later. Clouds hung low over the mountains when Rebecca entered the station. The building stood above the channel on timber posts blackened by years of weather. A single glass window faced the ravine. Calvin Dorsey waited beside a scarred desk in a dark wool coat. He smiled when she placed the oilcloth bundle before him. So, the marriage failed. Rebecca removed her gloves. It served its purpose. And Whitaker? Still thinks loyalty can hold land together. Dorsey opened the map. You understand more than he does. I understand my father found this route. Dorsey stopped smiling. He should have taken the warning. Rebecca kept her breathing even. What warning? To leave the books alone. Outside the window, Aaron waited behind a limestone shelf with Malcolm and Judge Hollis's deputy. Dorsey leaned closer. Your father found the channel. Amos frightened him. The mountain finished the work. Rebecca held his gaze. And you buried the records. I protected an investment. The words hung in the room. Enough. Almost. Dorsey turned toward the window. The old glass reflected the inside of the station, and the shadow of a very large man moving behind the rocks. Dorsey's hand went for his revolver. Rebecca stepped back. The gun fired. The bullet missed her and struck the wooden water gate above the station. A sharp crack tore through the canyon. For one breath, nothing moved. Then the upper brace split. Water burst through the broken flume. Mud, splintered timber, and stones rushed down the ravine toward the station. Aaron broke from cover. Rebecca! The floor shuddered beneath her boots as the wall of brown water struck the supports. The old measuring station lurched to one side. A timber beam snapped with a sharp crack. Rebecca grabbed the edge of the desk as muddy water burst through the broken doorway, carrying branches, loose planks, and pieces of the shattered flume. Calvin Dorsey stumbled backward. His revolver slipped from his hand and disappeared beneath the rushing current. Outside, Aaron covered the distance in only a few strides. He reached the porch just as another support gave way. Jump! He shouted. Rebecca looked toward him, then toward the heavy iron lever mounted beside the wall, the main control gate. If it failed completely, the rest of the channel would collapse, sending thousands of gallons into the lower ravine and washing away every ledger, every map, every piece of proof they had spent weeks protecting. She understood it in a heartbeat. "So do I," Aaron said, reading her face before she spoke. Rebecca shook her head. "If that gate goes, everything goes." Another beam groaned. Aaron climbed onto the leaning porch. He stretched out one hand, not demanding, waiting. Rebecca reached him. His grip closed firmly around her forearm, and with one powerful pull, he lifted her clear of the broken floor just as the room behind her collapsed into the torrent. They landed hard on the rocky bank. For one brief moment, they simply breathed. Then Rebecca looked upstream. The gate! Aaron followed her eyes. The main brace had twisted sideways. The iron locking pin still held, but only barely. "If it lets go," she whispered. Aaron was already running. Rebecca caught his sleeve. He stopped. "You can't hold that alone." He looked at the raging water. "I don't have to." He looked back at her. "We do." They climbed together. Mud pulled at their boots. Water sprayed across the rocks, cold enough to steal the breath from their lungs. The deputy marshal reached Dorsey first, helping him out of the flooded station before placing him under guard. Judge Hollis arrived moments later with 2 riders from town. No one wasted words. Everyone saw what mattered. Aaron braced himself against the damaged timber, his shoulders pressed beneath the crossbeam. Every muscle strained. The water shoved relentlessly against the gate. Rebecca crawled through the spray toward the iron pin. She could barely keep her footing. "A little higher," she called. Aaron shifted. Not much, just enough. The movement gave Rebecca the space she needed. She pulled the spare locking rod from the maintenance box bolted to the rocks. It was heavier than it looked. She pushed. It caught halfway. The current fought her. Aaron didn't tell her to hurry. He didn't tell her she couldn't do it. He simply held. Rebecca pushed again. Metal scraped against metal. Then, the locking rod dropped into place with a deep, solid clang. The gate stopped shaking. Water settled into the channel once more. Not perfectly, but safely. Aaron stepped back slowly. For the first time since the flood began, the valley grew quiet. Only the sound of moving water remained. Judge Hollis removed his hat. "Mr. Dorsey," he said evenly, "I believe we've heard enough." Calvin Dorsey looked toward the damaged station. His shoulders sagged. "There won't be a trial without those papers." Rebecca lifted the oilcloth bundle from beneath her coat, still dry. She had tucked it inside before entering the station. Judge Hollis accepted it carefully. "There will be." The deputy marshal escorted Dorsey toward his horse. This time he offered no argument. He knew the map, the ledger, his own words. Together, they had become stronger than any denial. A week later, nearly everyone in Dry Willow gathered outside the courthouse. The hearing lasted most of the morning. Amos testified first. His voice shook only once. He admitted changing freight records, opening the hidden gates, and helping Dorsey move supplies that never belonged to him. He also admitted Samuel Monroe had tried to stop it. Malcolm Vance placed the original ledger before Judge Hollis. Rebecca identified her father's handwriting without embellishment. She answered every question plainly. No speeches, no anger, only facts. When the hearing ended, Judge Hollis declared the diverted water rights void. The hidden channel would be dismantled. The grazing leases remained with the ranchers who had worked the land honestly. Samuel Monroe's name was formally cleared. The record describing him as a missing freight thief was struck from the county register. Rebecca closed her eyes for only a moment. When she opened them again, Aaron was standing beside her, not ahead of her, not behind her, beside her. People noticed. No one commented. They simply understood. Life settled slowly after that. Broken fences were repaired. The damaged flume was rebuilt where everyone could see it. The water flowed openly now. No hidden gates, no buried channels. One cool morning, Aaron harnessed the wagon himself. Inside rested a new saddle, a leather purse containing Rebecca's wages, the deed transferring ownership of a small parcel of meadow beside the creek, and a stagecoach ticket to Kansas. Rebecca found everything neatly arranged. "You planned this," Aaron nodded. "You fulfilled every promise. You think I'm leaving? I think you're free to." He looked toward the horses instead of at her. "I won't ask you to stay because of a contract." His hand rested against the wagon rail. The wood creaked softly beneath the pressure of his grip. Rebecca picked up the stagecoach ticket, then folded it once, twice. She laid it back on the seat. Next, she removed another document from her satchel. Aaron frowned. "What is it?" "A new agreement." He unfolded the pages. Rebecca had transferred her newly acquired meadow into a shared water trust for every ranch that depended on the creek. Another page created a profit-sharing fund for ranch hands who stayed through the winter. The final sheet crossed out one sentence from their original marriage contract. 1 year. Cancelled. Aaron read it twice. He looked up. "I don't understand." Rebecca smiled gently. "I came here looking for answers." She reached into her pocket. The small brass key to her bedroom rested in her palm. She placed it in his hand. "But I found a home." Aaron stared at the tiny key. Speech deserted him. Rebecca kept the second key, the one to the records room. "I'd like to keep working," she said. He finally looked into her eyes. "As my bookkeeper?" She smiled a little wider. "As your partner?" Aaron laughed quietly. It was the first time anyone on the ranch had heard the sound. The autumn wind crossed Redstone Valley, carrying the scent of fresh-cut pine and clear water. Neither of them climbed into the wagon. Instead, they walked back toward the porch together. Not because either one needed the other to survive anymore, because after everything they had faced, they had both chosen the same road. And for Aaron Whitaker, a man who had always believed strength meant carrying every burden alone, there were no words large enough for the gift Rebecca had quietly placed into his hands. Only gratitude, only respect, only love that had arrived one steady choice at a time. Years later, people in Dry Willow would remember the restored creek and the ranch that never closed its gate to a neighbor in need. Some would remember the court hearing, others would remember the flood. But those who truly knew Aaron and Rebecca remembered something quieter. They remembered a man strong enough to move timber, yet gentle enough to step aside so another person could walk freely. They remembered a woman who came searching for the truth about her father, only to discover that healing sometimes begins the moment we stop carrying every burden alone. Out on the frontier, survival often depended on the land beneath your boots. But a life worth keeping depended on something far less certain. Trust that had to be earned, dignity that refused to bend, and the courage to choose someone freely after every reason to walk away had disappeared. Love did not rescue Aaron and Rebecca from hardship. It taught them how to face hardship without surrendering who they were. In the end, the greatest promise they ever made was not spoken in a chapel. It was made every ordinary morning when they chose to stand beside each other again. If you had been in Rebecca's place, would you have boarded that stagecoach home? Or would you have stayed and built a new life? If stories like this leave you thinking long after the screen fades to black, we'd be honored to have you return. There are many more journeys across the American frontier still waiting to be shared. Stories of quiet courage, lasting hope, and the kind of love that grows stronger with every choice.